The courtroom fell silent as the teenage boy in the oversized blazer held up the time-stamped photo. "This image," he said, voice steady, "shows my sister already in handcuffs 5 minutes before the arrest was officially recorded." Gasps rippled through the room, because in that moment, everyone realized this wasn't just a kid defending his sister, he was dismantling the case piece by piece. Micah Townsend didn't look like anyone who belonged at the front of a courtroom. Not in that blazer, anyway. It hung too long on the arms, wide at the shoulders, the deep navy fabric worn thin at the elbows. It had belonged to his grandfather, one of the few things Micah kept after he passed, and it smelled faintly of mothballs and old cologne. In his left hand was a battered full-leather briefcase with one handle half torn off and a zipper that barely held. And yet he walked through the double doors of the Fairmont County Courthouse with the calm, deliberate steps of someone who wasn't here to observe but to change the course of what was about to happen. Inside, the courtroom buzzed with its usual morning rhythm, bailiffs shuffling paperwork, clerks tapping keys, and murmurs from the gallery rising and falling like waves. Then the door creaked, and heads turned. There was a flicker of confusion, even mild amusement, when they saw him. A kid, barely old enough to drive, standing at the center aisle in a suit that looked like a hand-me-down from 2 generations ago. Someone in the gallery let out a low chuckle. A man near the back leaned toward his neighbor and whispered, "Who let the intern in?" But Micah didn't stop. He walked straight past the rows of polished shoes and tailored suits, straight past the officer who started to rise from his seat as if to ask him to leave. He didn't pause until he reached the defense table and placed the briefcase down with care, as though every motion had been rehearsed. He unlatched it, opened it, and pulled out 3 file folders, a dog-eared copy of the Mississippi Code, and 1 folded document bearing an official notary seal. Then, only then, did he lift his chin and make eye contact with the bench. Judge Arnold Weaver adjusted his glasses. He was a tall man with gray-white hair combed straight back and a lined face that rarely moved. His reputation across Fairmont was carved in stone, tough, no-nonsense, and merciless when he thought someone was wasting the court's time. He'd been on the bench since before Micah was born. And as he squinted over his bifocals at the boy in the oversized blazer, a faint smirk tugged at the corner of his mouth. "You here for moral support, son," the judge said. His voice was slow and deliberate, laced with the kind of amusement that made grown men sweat. Micah didn't flinch. "No, Your Honor. I'm here as legal lay representative for Naomi Townsend." The courtroom stilled. Even the typing stopped. The bailiff blinked. A young female prosecutor sitting at the state's table, her name tag red marks, tilted her head slightly, as if unsure whether to laugh or object. Judge Weaver leaned back in his chair, the old wood creaking beneath him. "You're what now?" Micah held up the notarized document. "My sister, Naomi Townsend, filed a motion for pro se defense under Mississippi law. In that motion, she designated me as her lay representative under limited court approval, given her consent and the nature of the preliminary hearing." The judge raised a brow, then waved a hand toward the clerk. "Bring it here." The courtroom held its breath as the document was passed up to the bench. Judge Weaver examined it carefully, his eyes scanning the signature, the notary stamp, and the typed legal justification. When he looked up again, the smirk was still there, but it was thinner now. "You're 16. "Yes, sir." "You ever tried a case before?" "No, sir." "You have any legal training?" "Only what I've studied on my own. I've read every file in Naomi's case. Twice. I've studied civil liberties, Fourth Amendment case law, and the admissibility of digital evidence. I'm not here to play at being a lawyer, Your Honor. I'm here because nobody else would do it." There was a pause. A long one. The kind that stretched so tight across the room it might snap. Judge Weaver let out a low breath through his nose. "This is a preliminary hearing, not a trial. We're only deciding whether this case proceeds further. I'll allow it." Micah nodded once, then sat down, slowly opening his folders. From the gallery, Naomi watched silently. Her hands were cuffed in front of her, the orange of the county jumpsuit crumpled at the elbows. She looked tired, but her eyes never left her brother. The court clerk called out, State of Mississippi versus Naomi Townsend. The young prosecutor, Jillian Marks, stood and launched into her summary of charges. She spoke fast and clear: burglary, resisting arrest, possession of suspected stolen items. She painted Naomi as a woman caught red-handed with electronics in her car after fleeing a local business. According to her version, there were no doubts, no ambiguity. An open and shut case. But Micah was already flipping through his folder. Calmly. Quietly. When Marks finished, Judge Weaver looked over. Do you have anything, Mr. Townsend? Micah stood. Yes, Your Honor. I'd like to request cross-examination of the arresting officer, Brent Carver. The judge nodded. Proceed. Officer Carver stepped up. Big man. Balding. Looked like he'd done this 100 times. He spoke like someone who expected no resistance. Micah approached the podium slowly, adjusting the sleeves of the oversized blazer. Officer Carver, you testified that my sister was apprehended outside of a storefront with stolen merchandise, correct? Yes. At what time did this take place? Approximately 8:52 p.m. Micah opened a folder, pulled out a printed image, and held it up. Your Honor, this is a still image from a neighbor's Ring camera, timestamped 8:47 p.m., 5 minutes before the arrest report was filed. In the image, Naomi is already on the ground, handcuffed, with no merchandise visible in or around the vehicle. There was a murmur from the gallery. Marks looked up sharply. Micah turned back to Carver. Can you explain this discrepancy? Carver blinked. We may have misrecorded the official stop time. You also failed to record the anonymous tip that allegedly prompted the stop. Is that correct? There was a call, yes, but was it logged? No. Was your body cam on? No. Micah stepped back. So, to be clear, the timeline doesn't match, the tip wasn't logged, the body cam was off, and the arrest occurred before the official stop? Carver's mouth opened, but no sound came out. Micah nodded. Understood. Then he pulled out another document. I'd like to submit into evidence a signed statement from Mr. Luis Mendoza, the store owner. He affirms that nothing was stolen. That he never called the police. That, in fact, Naomi had paid in full, and he forgot to tell the responding officers she had already left. Mark stood. Objection, this was not included in discovery. Micah didn't miss a beat. Because no one bothered to speak with him. I did. Yesterday. He signed this in front of a notary. Judge Weaver raised an eyebrow, taking the statement. I'll allow it. The courtroom shifted again. The tone had changed. Micah wasn't some kid in a borrowed blazer anymore. He was the only one in that room who seemed to know what he was doing. And as the judge looked over the statement, as Officer Carver shifted in discomfort, and as Naomi's eyes filled with something unspoken, maybe hope, maybe disbelief, Micah stood straight, calm, steady, and unshakably sure of one thing. He hadn't come to play the part. He'd come to win the fight no one else would. The weight of the silence in the courtroom wasn't lost on anyone, not even on Judge Weaver, who now sat slightly straighter on the bench, as if the boy in front of him had grown 6 inches taller since walking in. Micah Townsend returned to his seat, calm but alert, organizing his notes while the prosecutor glanced nervously at the judge, clearly recalibrating her assumptions. No one had expected this. Not from a kid in a borrowed blazer with sleeves past his knuckles. But the way he handled himself, the way he walked facts into the room like they belonged there, it forced the court to shift in its seat. The whispers that had once carried condescension now carried curiosity. Officer Brent Carver, seated stiffly on the prosecution's side, had yet to speak, but his eyes, once indifferent, were now focused entirely on Micah, sizing him up like a new kind of problem. The judge cleared his throat. Officer Carver, take the stand. As the officer adjusted his belt and walked to the witness chair, Micah stood slowly, like the moment had been waiting for him. Permission to cross-examine, Your Honor. Granted. Micah approached the podium with the quiet confidence of someone who knew exactly where this was going, even if the room didn't. He opened his folder, looked up at Carver. Officer, you testified in your original statement that Ms. Naomi Townsend was apprehended while exiting the Fairmart Electronics Store at approximately 8:52 p.m., is that correct? Correct. And that she was in possession of 2 laptop boxes, a wireless speaker, and other merchandise allegedly unpaid for, correct? Yes. And that she resisted arrest? Yes, she became combative after I stopped her outside the store. Outside the store? Yes. Your Honor, Micah said, holding up a printed photo, I'd like to enter this ring camera footage still into evidence. The judge nodded, and the bailiff brought it forward. This image, Micah continued, was pulled from the porch cam of a resident across the street. It is timestamped at 8:47 p.m., 5 minutes before the reported arrest time. In it, Naomi is already on the sidewalk, handcuffed, kneeling, and with no merchandise visible. A rustle moved through the gallery. Judge Weaver leaned in, studying the image. Officer Carver shifted in his seat. Do you have an explanation for the discrepancy in time, officer? There may have been a delay in recording the official time, Carver said tightly. Your body cam would have clarified that, wouldn't it? It wasn't recording. Why not? Battery died. Was there a log of the anonymous tip that allegedly prompted you to head to Fairmart? There was a dispatch call, but was it logged, officer? Was there a case number attached to that tip? Any recorded origin? Carver hesitated. No. Micah held up a printout. This is a transcript of your radio call at 8:39 p.m., taken from the county's dispatch system. You did not mention any anonymous tip. You simply said, and I quote, headed to Fairmart, suspect in sight. Silence. Carver looked down at his hands. So, to clarify, Micah continued, you arrested my sister 5 minutes before your report says you did, without body cam footage, without a log tip, and without visible evidence in the footage we just submitted. Carver said nothing. Understood, Micah said, and turned to the next page in his notes. Let's talk about the merchandise. He looked to the judge. Permission to enter additional documents into the record. Proceed, said Judge Weaver. Micah handed the bailiff a set of papers. These are transaction receipts from Naomi's checking account. One for the laptops, one for the speaker, all purchased 2 days before the alleged incident. The items were not stolen. They were already hers. The gallery stirred again. The prosecutor's face had gone from annoyed to deeply unsettled. Micah continued, additionally, Your Honor, we've submitted a signed statement from Mr. Luis Mendoza, owner of Fairmart, affirming that no theft was reported that night and that no employee called 911. Judge Weaver scanned the papers, jaw tight. And how did you obtain this? I visited him. In person. I asked politely. A few people chuckled, this time with him. The judge didn't smile. But he didn't speak either. Micah turned back toward Officer Carver. Officer, would you say you're familiar with my family? Carver stiffened. I've encountered them. You've arrested Naomi before? Traffic citation. Have you interacted with me before today? Yes. How would you describe your general attitude toward the Townsend family? Neutral, Carver lied. Micah nodded, then paused. I'd like to call a witness. Mr. Jared Holmes. A ripple of surprise moved through the room as a man near the back stood. Mid-30s, wearing work boots and a flannel shirt, he walked to the stand. The prosecutor scrambled through her paperwork. Your Honor, she objected, this witness wasn't disclosed. I can explain, Micah said. He's a former colleague of Officer Carver. He has relevant testimony regarding bias. The judge hesitated. We're only at a preliminary hearing. I'll allow it. Keep it focused. Thank you, Micah said, and faced the witness. Mr. Holmes, how long did you work with Officer Carver? About 4 years. Did you speak with him recently about this case? Yes. What did he say? He said, Holmes began, swallowing hard, he was tired of the Townsend family thinking they were smarter than the badge. Said Naomi needed to be taught a lesson. Said, if he got the chance, he'd make sure it stuck. A sharp gasp shot through the room. Even the judge blinked. Did he mention planting evidence? Micah asked quietly. He said he didn't need to. Said the town would take his word over hers every time. Objection, the prosecutor barked. Hearsay. Goes to motive, Micah replied. Judge Weaver held up a hand. Enough. I've heard enough. But Micah wasn't done. He stepped forward. Closer to the bench. Your Honor, I know what this looks like. A kid in a borrowed blazer with no credentials cross-examining police officers and calling surprise witnesses. But what it really is a system that's been running unchecked. My sister isn't perfect. But she didn't do this. And every single piece of evidence we've presented proves it. The only question now is whether this courtroom is willing to admit it. The judge didn't respond. The air had turned electric. Even the prosecutor sat speechless. You've presided over this town for 30 years, Micah said, his voice low but unwavering. But how many people have sat in this very chair and never had a voice loud enough to reach you? I'm not asking for sympathy. I'm asking for accountability. Then he stepped back, hands steady at his sides. That's all. The judge stared at him for a long moment, then glanced down at the docket. We'll take a short recess, he said finally. 15 minutes. The gavel came down, but no one moved. No one whispered. No one even shifted in their seat. Because in that moment, they all knew something had changed in that courtroom. Not just the direction of the case, but the way they saw the boy in the blazer. The one who spoke like the truth mattered more than fear. The one who, just maybe, had already won. The courtroom hadn't moved. Even after the gavel came down and Judge Weaver called for recess, no one rose. Not really. A few people shifted in their seats or whispered behind their hands, but the usual shuffle of footsteps, the rustling of coats and briefcases, it never came. It was as if the entire room had collectively forgotten how to breathe. At the defense table, Micah Townsend sat still, hands resting on the same worn file folders he'd brought in that morning, sleeves of his grandfather's blazer still too long, bunching around his wrists. But no one was laughing now. No one was smirking. Not even the judge. He had walked out of the chamber slowly, almost cautiously, like he needed space to think, like someone who just realized the mirror he'd been avoiding had finally found his reflection. Naomi, still cuffed but sitting straighter than before, glanced at her brother. Their eyes met. No words passed between them, but something in that look said everything. A thank you. A you did it. And underneath it all, a quiet understanding, they weren't done yet. Not until that door opened again. 10 minutes stretched like a wire pulled tight. The prosecutor, Jillian Marks, flipped through her notes again and again, her posture rigid, eyes down. Officer Carver sat a few feet away, arms crossed, lips pressed into a thin line. He hadn't said a word since the cross-examination. Not when Holmes dropped the truth like a brick through glass. Not when the gallery audibly gasped. Not even when the judge rose from the bench without looking back. Now, even Carver seemed smaller. Like the uniform that once made him untouchable had suddenly lost its power. The bailiff stepped forward. All rise. The room snapped to its feet. The side door creaked open. Judge Weaver re-entered, robe flowing behind him, his face unreadable. He didn't look at Micah. Didn't look at the gallery. He just returned to the bench, sat down slowly, and placed both hands flat on the desk like he was steadying himself before a storm. This court is back in session. His voice, when it came, was lower than before. Not weak, just level. After reviewing the evidence presented in this preliminary hearing, including multiple items not originally provided in discovery, it is the opinion of this court that the prosecution has failed to meet the burden of probable cause. A ripple passed through the courtroom like a held breath finally released. Therefore, he continued, the charges against Naomi Townsend, burglary, resisting arrest, and possession of stolen property, are hereby dismissed in full. With prejudice. A pause. The silence was thick, not stunned this time, but reverent. No one clapped. No one cheered. It wasn't that kind of victory. It was the kind that hit slow and deep, the kind that left you blinking back tears you didn't even realize were there. Naomi exhaled sharply, one cuffed hand rising to her mouth. Micah didn't move. He just stared straight ahead, eyes locked on the judge, as if waiting for the other shoe to drop. But instead, Judge Weaver looked up, and for the first time that day, truly met Micah's gaze. "Mr. Townsend," he said, voice quiet now, "please approach the bench." Micah glanced at Naomi, then stood. The sleeves of the blazer swung at his sides as he stepped forward, slow and careful. He stopped just before the bench. The judge leaned forward, speaking low enough that only the two of them could hear. "You made me look in a mirror today," he said, not unkindly. "And I didn't like what I saw. That needed to happen." Micah didn't answer. He wasn't sure he was supposed to. The judge straightened back in his chair. "Court is adjourned." The gavel came down for the last time. The room didn't erupt. But it shifted. It changed. People stood slowly, whispering not out of gossip, but out of awe. Someone in the back muttered, "That boy, he just changed everything." Micah turned back toward Naomi just as a bailiff stepped forward and began unlocking her cuffs. She rubbed her wrists, stood shakily, then crossed the space between them in 2 strides and wrapped him in an embrace so tight it nearly knocked the folders from his hand. "You did it," she whispered. "You actually did it." "You never should have had to sit there in the first place," he replied, voice steady but thick. They walked out of the courtroom side by side, past stunned prosecutors, past a silent carver who couldn't meet their eyes, past local reporters with notepads poised but no idea what to ask. Outside, the Mississippi sun had begun to dip low, painting the courthouse steps in gold. Naomi stopped for a moment, letting the light hit her face. "I don't even know how to thank you," she said. "Don't," Micah replied. "Just keep being you." That's all I needed. But Micah didn't go home after that. Not yet. As Naomi got into the car with their aunt, he slung the battered briefcase over his shoulder and started walking. Down Main Street. Past the bakery that didn't used to let kids like him hang around. Past the sheriff's office that used to raise eyebrows whenever he walked by. He didn't stop until he reached the corner of Oak and Elm, where a squat brick building with peeling green trim stood like a quiet sentinel over the town, Fairmont Public Library. The place where he'd spent hours every week for the past year, hunched over law books from the 90s, watching YouTube videos on a library desktop too slow to stream in HD, taking notes in a second-hand spiral-bound notebook with half the pages ripped out. He stepped inside, greeted by the familiar scent of old paper and the soft click of keys. Behind the desk sat Miss Henrietta Ross, the librarian who had seen him more than anyone else that year. A woman with silver hair pulled into a tight bun and glasses that always slid to the tip of her nose. She looked up, and her eyes widened. "Micah?" He nodded once. That was all it took. She came around the desk and pulled him into a hug that smelled like peppermint tea and worn-out bookmarks. "I told you," she whispered. "Didn't I tell you? You keep showing up like that, and the world's gonna have to take notice." "I think they just did," he said. They stood there a minute, then she pulled back, smoothing the front of his blazer. "You keep coming back here," she said firmly. "Don't let this town shrink you down." "I won't." He looked over at the back corner table, the one he always claimed as his own. For a moment, he just stood there, staring at it. Then he walked over, sat down, and pulled out his notebook. Not because he had to, but because he wasn't done. Not even close. In the weeks that followed, the town began to change, slowly, subtly, but undeniably. Officer Carver was placed on administrative leave pending internal investigation. The prosecutor, Jillian Marks, was quietly reassigned to a different jurisdiction. And Judge Arnold Weaver, the man who once smirked at the boy in the too big blazer, announced a new monthly initiative, Open Community Hearings, his first public engagement effort in 30 years. People showed up. They asked questions. They were listened to. And every time someone said, "None of this would have happened without that kid," it wasn't just flattery. It was fact. Micah didn't go on TV. No law school came calling. No scholarships rained from the sky. But every afternoon, he still showed up at the library. And slowly, other kids started coming too. At first, just one or two. Then more. Middle schoolers. Freshmen. A few who'd seen the courtroom story go viral on TikTok. They came with questions. With homework. With dreams they didn't dare say out loud until they saw someone like Micah make space for them. And every time one of them asked, "Are you going to be a lawyer one day?" Micah would smile, close his notebook, and say, "I'm just telling the truth." And sometimes, that's enough. Sometimes, justice doesn't walk in wearing a robe. Sometimes, it enters the courtroom in a blazer 2 sizes too big, held up by a 16-year-old kid with a briefcase that's seen better days. The boy with the borrowed blazer isn't just a story about Micah Townsend, it's a reminder of what's possible when courage and preparation meet in the face of disbelief. Micah didn't have credentials. He didn't have years of legal experience. But what he did have was truth, persistence, and a refusal to be dismissed. He stood up not just for his sister, but for every voice that has been talked over, doubted, or disregarded simply because of how young they are, or how they look, or where they come from. He wasn't there to impress. He was there to make them listen. And they did. The lesson is clear: you don't have to wait for permission to speak up. If you've done the work, if you've gathered your facts, if your heart is steady, you're ready. It doesn't matter if they don't expect you to show up. What matters is that you do. We live in a world that too often confuses age or background with ability. But Micah taught us something powerful. Sometimes the greatest shift in a broken system starts with the courage of just one person who refuses to stay quiet. You don't have to be a lawyer to demand justice. You just have to be brave enough to say, "This isn't right," and smart enough to prove it. So whether you're a student, a parent, a community member, or someone who's felt underestimated your whole life, let Micah's story remind you, your voice matters. Learn what you can. Speak with clarity. Stand with truth. And when the moment comes, don't flinch. From all of us here at U.S. Justice Story, thank you for spending your time with us. These stories aren't just entertainment, they're reflections of real struggles, real victories, and real people who make change happen, one small act of defiance at a time. If Micah's journey inspired you, we encourage you to share it with someone who might need to be reminded that no matter how small they feel, their voice can carry weight. And to those of you who continue to believe in truth, justice, and the power of resilience, we see you, and we'll keep telling stories that honor you. Until next time, stay strong, stay informed, and never stop speaking up.